Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us here today. I know we have people tuning in online also, and we may have a few more people who walk in. As you know, today's town hall meeting is a special one in that it is devoted to really getting feedback relative to how we're going to implement this concealed carry law, which goes into effect on August 1st, 2016. We have a campus carry committee that's chaired by Dr. Michael Ainsworth, and he's really going to carry the burden of presenting information, facilitating the discussion today. The committee came into being at the close of the legislative session. We really waited till the end of the summer, beginning of the fall. And we've been working along with our colleagues at the other UT institutions and at institutions of higher education, public institutions of higher ed around the state, to think about, okay, what will be the best practices associated with implementation of the law? The law is specific in some ways and perhaps a bit vague in others. It gives the president of each public institution of higher education the charge to come up with an approach for her or his campus that then needs to be submitted for review. If there is a board, like our Board of Regents, be reviewed by the board. If they're going to change something or ask for a change, they have to do that by 2/3 vote. And then it's sent back to the campus for further review and change, ultimately to be reviewed by the legislature. So we have to implement the law. The question is, what makes the most sense for our campus? And of course, we have National Lab, we have a prison hospital, we're engaged in delivery of complex health care, we have a number of dangerous select agents and chemicals that we use in conducting research and some patient care operations. We have students. We have K through 12 students who occasionally visit our campus or campuses. So there are a lot of factors that come into play as we think about how to best implement this law. And of course, bottom line, we're responsible for securing the safety of all on our campuses, all who work here, all who learn here, all who visit here. So with that in mind, let me turn it over to Dr. Ainsworth. He has done, from my perspective, a marvelous job of leading this committee. He also serves as our liaison to the system committee, and he'll take it from here. Dr. Ainsworth.
Thank you, Dr. Callender. The town hall today really serves two functions. One is to give you some background information about Senate Bill 11 and bring you up to date about the deliberations that the campus-based committee that Dr. Callender referred to have undertaken so far. And then, probably more importantly, to solicit your ideas and input, give your perspectives about campus carry, and help guide the committee in the remaining work that they have to do. After my presentation, with the opportunity for you to speak freely from the audience, I encourage you to provide your perspectives, your points of view. I know that you'll have a number of questions as well, some of which I have tried to incorporate into my slides or into a few comments I'll make after the slides. But I have to tell you that some questions may as yet be unanswerable, related to the law, related to politics, related to the details of implementation of the law. So it may not be possible to give you a clear answer for some of your more burning questions, but if that's the case, then we will make note of that as the committee and try and gather more information. As Dr. Callender mentioned, the 14 campus-based committees in the UT system are also doing to try and come up with reasonable recommendations for all. These are the members of the campus carry committee appointed by the president, both regular members and ex officio members, some of whom are here in the audience today, and even if not, represent potential contacts for you if the Campus Carry website is not sufficient, or forums like this or individual groups that I've spoken to are not sufficient. Please feel free to make use of both the expertise and the listening abilities of the individuals on the committee if you would like to transmit any of your ideas or opinions on a one-on-one basis. I've been asked what the current policy here is at UTMB. Remember, Campus Carry does not go into effect until August 1st of next year. Here is the current IHOP policy that addresses the presence of weapons on the UTMB campus, and Campus Carry will require some adaptation of this policy. So I have found it important to mention the exact wording of Senate Bill 11 so that everyone has a common starting point and common set of definitions. And I've highlighted what I think are probably the most important relevant aspects of it for us. The bill states that a license holder, in this case they mean a concealed handgun license holder, not just anyone, may carry a concealed handgun on the campus of an institution of higher learning. That is the intent of the law. That is the way it is actually worded. And the additional points I'm going to make now give some additional detail or leeway to campuses. It does state, also as Dr. Callender mentioned, that based on the nature of the student population, safety considerations, and other factors, the president shall establish reasonable rules, regulations, or other provisions related to the law. So some latitude, some discretion about implementation of the law is provided for. However, the law goes on to say that the president may not establish provisions that generally prohibit or have the effect of generally prohibiting license holders from carrying concealed handguns. So the latitude provided to campuses in Senate Bill 11 is limited. Then goes on to mention that we may make regulations concerning storage of handguns in dormitories. This might be a good time to mention, remember, the UT system has a number of academic as well as health system campuses, so for schools with undergraduate populations, on-campus housing is probably a larger issue than it is for campuses like ours. Also important to mention what Senate Bill 11 is not. The legislature passed another bill, House Bill 910, often referred to as open carry. It becomes law in January, and it makes it legal for these same license holders, concealed handgun license holders, to carry visible handguns, not just concealed handguns in Texas. But open carry is a different law, does not apply to institutions of higher learning, and open carry will not be legal on our campus, is not legal now, and will not be legal on August 1st. The function of our local committee, indeed the committees at each of the institutions of the UT system, is to make recommendations to the president related to implementation of the law. Specifically, that includes recommendations related to whether or not there should be any excluded buildings or areas, and a broader set of policies to help implement the law. There's a system-wide task force that each campus is participating in to share expertise, try and solve common problems, or get a perspective from different viewpoints. And as you heard, ultimately, recommendations will go to the Chancellor of the Board of Regents. A couple of words about differences between the law and legislative intent. There are certain things that are said in the words of the law, in this case, the words of Senate Bill 11, and then there are other details that may only be inferred by other discussions made during the legislative session. This is the committee's attempt to give you some specific guidance related to the law and the intent of the legislature. Some of these may be quite obvious, maybe some others are not. A concealed handgun law is a concealed handgun law. It must be concealed, not open, and must be closely controlled. I'll say a few more words about the closely controlled part in a moment, but it's a critical part of the law. Intentional revealing of a weapon is a violation. So many of you have questions about what you do when you see a weapon, when you see a handgun. Clearly that has violated the law, or at least the intent of Senate Bill 11 in terms of concealed weapons, so we'll talk about that. No one can be required to disclose their CHL status or be denied entrance to a non-excluded area based on their CHL status. A commonly worded question is, may I ask someone if they have a CHL license? Strictly by the law, the answer is you may ask. They are not required to answer. Only a licensed law officer can require someone to produce identification, a license, and reveal the presence of a weapon. In practice, I will tell you, since you cannot require an answer, you should think carefully about whether or not you would even ask such a question and what you would learn from it. That may raise some additional questions from the audience. The limited discretion issue. Blanket exclusion of most or all campus buildings or areas is not allowed by this law. Some may read that literally, some may call that an interpretation. The committee is functioning on the point of view that the law does not allow us to completely ban concealed handguns from campus. The committee is also proceeding with the idea that when we make recommendations about excluded areas or buildings, it should be based on a specific rationale, something unique about our campus, unique about our population, unique about the circumstances of an area or building that represents a clearly definable risk. We're also proceeding on the knowledge that statistically, CHL holders are more law-abiding than the public as a whole, and that the presence of a concealed handgun by a CHL holder itself cannot be considered inherently disruptive. You might be interested about what has happened or is going on in other states. There are 8 other states that have specific laws related to campus carry. Now, there are other states for which campus carry is a local discretion issue that a campus can define on their own, but there are 8 other states where it is a legal matter defined by law of those respective state legislatures. And although this may be a little bit hard to follow, I will state that the specifics and the interpretations are very much all across the board in these other states. You see in the first example, in the state of Arkansas, concealed carry is allowed for faculty, but not for other members of the campus. For most of the other states, it affects everyone on the campus. In some states, campuses have broad discretion about exemption or opting out, and you see that the top cluster all have chosen to opt out. You also see states such as California, where since 2003 and subsequent court decisions, campus carry has been legislated, allowed, and reaffirmed, and yet still campuses are in discussion, litigation, or choosing to exclude certain areas. So even in states where the law may seem totally clear, implementation of the law is quite varied across the 8 states that have legal status for campus carry. A couple of tenets to give you a feel for the discussions going on in the committee. They may help you in your perspectives or in your comments. The committee's policy discussions in general are not being shaped by fear of unlawful activity by CHL holders, nor, perhaps at the other end of the spectrum, are the discussions being shaped by some expectation that CHL holders protect others in cases of violence or may even deter violence. We are not basing our discussions or ultimate decisions on these sorts of issues. Our discussions are being shaped by these things: focusing on campus safety while following the law, and respect that by law, CHL holders have the right to carry a concealed weapon, balanced by the issues that you see here, our motivation to mitigate those things that are under our control as risks: accidental discharges, theft or disarming of a CHL holder, risk to specially vulnerable populations, or more widespread or catastrophic damage. We believe as a committee these things we can influence by policy, whereas other things we cannot. There's a website. I hope you've been there. There have been 4,000 or 5,000 visits to it. 200 plus individuals have chosen to leave comments. This is my tabular attempt to categorize comments into one of three categories: those who left comments that suggest they prefer no weapons allowed on campus, those who would be either prefer or accept specific exclusion zones for handguns, and those who would prefer no exclusion zones be identified. And these are the numbers of the respondents in each of those categories for your review. I thought I would summarize for you the types of comments that have been most frequent by individuals who feel a certain way, both on the website comments and in the 9 or 10 group-based meetings that I've had with campus constituents so far. Some comments clearly reflect the view that allowing handguns on our campus represents a threat to safety. And these are the types of comments or arguments or justifications that are commonly voiced or written to support that view: accidental discharges, disarming, erratic or criminal behavior by the CHL holder, theft, or the creation of a special challenge for law enforcement when both good guys and bad guys may have guns. There are also comments by those who are clearly expressing the view that prohibiting handguns represents a threat to safety. And these are the types of comments most commonly expressed or heard: that those with criminal intent are not deterred, that bad guys may in fact target gun-free zones and may be deterred by knowing or potentially knowing that CHL holders are present, that CHL holders have the right to self-defense and exclusions should be carefully thought out, and those who feel that if CHL holders are prohibited from bringing their weapons to work, they would want to see a stronger law enforcement presence in gun-free zones. Which brings me to the two most commonly supported potential exclusion zones based on the deliberations of the committee so far. There are two. The first, loosely defined at the moment as patient care areas. Not just a hospital, not just a clinic, not just an ER. Any place where patient care occurs and a medical record is kept. That's traditional areas, that's employee health, that's student health, that's mental care, medical care, mental health care, everything that represents the provision of care. And the rationales that we are discussing are basically based in three areas. That the hospital or clinical care areas represent an area where there is a presence of a particularly vulnerable population. certainly patients who are ill, incapacitated, helpless, comatose, unable to defend themselves. Some have even suggested that the care providers represent a vulnerable population in very challenging clinical situations. In terms of precedent, most hospitals are in fact already excluded. The word hospital is used specifically in this case. Hospitals are already excluded or may exclude handguns by law, a protection not afforded to all areas of care. And then purely practical challenges and implementation of such a law. There would be a high risk of unconcealing of weapons or separation of the weapon holder from their weapon in the normal course of clinical activity. Gowning, ungowning, moving from room to room, going to areas where handguns would represent a special hazard such as an MRI machine, all those sorts of things that make it very challenging to protect everyone in a clinical care environment. Second category, perhaps not yet perfectly defined, is listed here under areas where discharge of a handgun might cause more widespread harm. Key examples might be laboratories that have select agents, hazardous chemicals, biologics, explosive agents, gas cylinders, incompatible equipment, where release of an agent or a bullet striking a compressed gas cylinder could cause more than just harm to an individual, but more catastrophic complications. Precedent-based might include issues such as there are areas on campus for which we already recognize as high risk. Sometimes that's by using controlled access, such as an animal care center. Sometimes it's with metal detectors, such as the GNL. But areas where I think others have already recognized that they represent special hazards for the presence of handguns, either in the hands of employees, visitors, or anyone who might have access to the area. And the same category of practical implementation-based issues in areas where changing of clothes is a commonplace part of the workday. There are many, many other challenges related to actually adopting a comprehensive set of policies for the concealed carry law. I've listed the ones that have attracted the most attention so far. I'm sure you might be able to add others. Some buildings are simple to classify. Others are not. The GNL is a research area. Mary Moody Northern has exclusively classrooms on the first floor and almost exclusively labs on the upper floors. Buildings that have multiple functions or buildings that are connected represent some challenge in defining exclusion zones and making it clear and open to every individual as to which areas are allowed and which are prohibited. Storage options. A lot of discussion has been focused around what sort of storage options make sense. Is it the responsibility of the CHL holder? Is it the responsibility of the institution? What represents safe storage options, which can be allowed and not allowed? Signage, safe carrying policies, and clearly the sort of education and training we would want everyone to have to be aware of the different environment that we will be functioning in. So in summary, the committee has two responsibilities: to recommend exclusion areas, if any, and to develop a comprehensive set of policies. That is what we are going to be working on for the next few months at least. The law goes into effect on August 1st, but clearly there is a lot of planning, preparation, signage, and other things to be done before that day. So clearly decisions will have to be made, at least on an initial basis, early in 2016 for us to be prepared. Let me shift for a moment to a few of the questions that were submitted, and then I'll open the floor for your comments. Are off-campus clinics considered to be part of the campus and therefore included in this law? The answer is yes. Buildings and areas that UTMB owns or controls are part of this. So the Victory Lakes campus, the Angleton-Danbury campus are examples of areas where our policies would apply. And to the extent that those are, for example, clinical care areas, they would fall into the patient care area exclusion zone if we were to ultimately adopt that. There will be some buildings for which the ownership or control will have to be more clearly defined. Buildings that are by their nature either not directly owned by UTMB or has some sort of shared ownership or operating policies, and we will have to make decisions for those buildings on an individual basis. But it is not campus as defined by just the local Galveston campus. Maybe a closely related question is, since the term campus is often used equivalently with academics, is this aimed at a specific group such as students? And the answer is no. It is anyone who is on the campus, that is students, employees, faculty, staff, visitors, patients, anyone who is physically on the campus would be impacted by this law. It is stated that individual faculty or staff members cannot post signage that prohibits handguns in their offices or classrooms. Can individual faculty or staff post signage that discourages handguns in their office or classroom? Well, the simple answer to that is very obviously something that will have to be addressed clearly in the policy. I think the discussions of the committee so far would suggest that discouraging would not be within the latitude that we have. We will have to define what are excluded zones, which are not excluded zones, and all people need to be able to rely on that information. But I welcome your discussion about that. I support a definition of campus-sensitive areas that include classroom spaces and offices where debate or conflict resolution may take place, and identifying those as exclusion zones. The concept of a conflict resolution zone comes up a lot in terms of whether that represents an area of special risk that should be considered for exclusion, and I would very much like to hear some comments and perspectives from the audience about that. One of the challenges with such a term, such as conflict resolution zone, is it could be defined as narrowly as a specific human resources or academic enterprise hearing on a student or employee, and could be defined as broadly as any time I'm in my office and having a discussion with a student about their grade, that is a potential conflict. And so any student meeting in any office could be a conflict resolution meeting. And so defining where a practical definition would actually apply in those situations, I think, is particularly challenging. A definition that included every classroom and every office would probably fit the criteria for a practical exclusion of handguns from the entire campus. So it's a very challenging environment. Sometimes armed citizens want to help trained law enforcement, but lack training in dealing with the mentally ill. What steps is UTMB going to take to keep those who are not armed safe from those who are? And that is another area where I think both policy and education will play a tremendous role. Most CHL holders are, of course, very responsible individuals, and it is rare we have heard comments about someone taking on a larger role in public safety as is implied here. But we would want every CHL holder on campus to know that law enforcement are the proper groups to handle law enforcement. And they are not encouraged to take roles in terms of enforcing the law themselves. Remember the issues related to confrontational situations that relate to options that you have available, which might be escape, which might be hiding, and fighting back or taking the law into your own hands is clearly the last resort anyone would want to take in that situation. So the opportunity to help CHL holders and non-CH holders alike understand what proper procedures are, what proper behaviors are, what safe gun handling actions are, is critical to avoid situations where a non-CHL holder has to fear that somehow a CHL holder will take the law into their own hands. We have to do everything we can to prevent that from happening. I think I'll stop there in terms of the potentially answerable questions anyway, and now I'd like to invite anyone who would like to either step up to the microphone, or we'll have individuals bring a handheld mic to you to provide your input, your comments, your perspectives. I'll do my best if you pose it in the form of a question, but I can only do so much.
I, of course, have a comment. Thank you, Dr. Ainsworth. Thank you, Dr. Callender, for hosting this town hall. I'm Laura Redkin. I'm Chair of Preventive Medicine and Community Health, and we hold the public health program within our department. And I would view it as professional misconduct if I didn't speak out at an event like this, because the public health community is pretty strongly opposed to weapons on weapons on campus. I did want to point out a data question with the table that you presented. If you looked at my comments that I posted, they would have fallen in that middle category, and that's only because I felt powerless to comment on the total exclusion of guns from campus. So I wouldn't view that as a polling data. I would view it more as people trying to be realistic about the situation and offering comments that they thought might be helpful to you in that context.
I think that's very helpful, thank you. And in terms of that table, perhaps the distinction between a combined left and middle column, which represented total exclusion or partial exclusion, from the right-hand column about allowing weapons, that may be a more rational distinction.
Or just pointing it out when you present that data. From another data point, you've got two slides, one of the summary of the comments opposed and one of the summary of the comments in favor. And having two slides of equal size suggests then that there's equivalency in positions on both sides, and that's not always the case.
I appreciate that.
And of course, that I could stand up here for another half hour, but I'm going to step back now. Thank you.
That last comment by Dr. Rudkin refers to, if you didn't have a chance to look at the numbers specifically, the left-hand column and the middle column represents 86% of respondents in this voluntary non-scientific poll, and the right-hand column represents 14% of respondents.
You tried to ask really helpful questions, and so I think that colors the way people respond to it.
I believe Dr. Rudkin is right. The phenomena of if the law says total exclusion is not an option, why would that even be here for consideration? And it is to get people's points of view, and that's all it is. Absolutely.
Good afternoon. Thanks again. My name's Kathy Tiernan. My comment really is, I'll put it in the form of a question. 4 major academic leadership institutions have come out against campus carry on academic campuses. Does that hold any credence in this discussion?
When you say academic groups, are you talking about a...
like the American Academy of College Professors and the American Academy of... Thank you.
Dr. Rudkin apparently
American
has,
Association of University Professors.
Somehow I knew that.
The American Federation of Teachers, the Association of American Colleges and Universities, and the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges. These 4 groups, I would think, hold some weight in this country, speaking toward academic safety and concerns. And they've all strongly said that they don't think an academic campus or classrooms or faculty offices are safe if people bring concealed weapons. Is this committee taking any of this into consideration?
The committee is aware of that sort of information or reference material from different academic groups. The challenge here, the issue here is this is not totally a local campus option decision that we are making. We are charged with both protecting the campus and obeying the law. And the best interpretation, both by the letter of the law and legislative intent that we can discern, including co-sponsors of the bill that have spoken publicly about their intention with the campus carry law, is that a total exclusion or an essentially total exclusion is contrary to the intent of the law. And we do have to follow the law. Where we do have discretion is defining how broad that window of local discretion is. As I've mentioned to you before, I do think that if we included all classrooms and all offices, it would be about as close to a total exclusion as possible. The only power we have beyond what I've described to you is the power that the chancellor had when he spoke out against the bill during the legislative session, and the others who have done so, to implement the law as we are given it in as responsible and safe a way as we can. And should changes be possible in the next legislative session, continue to make those points of view across to the legislature. But we do not have an option to ignore the law. Sir.
Mike, David, thanks for putting this forum together. It is difficult to come up with policies. I think you guys are doing the best that you can under the circumstances. I think it's hard for us as faculty, I'm speaking for myself really, and folks I've spoken with, that this is more of an emotional issue in many cases. We are scared. Like I'm fearful of handguns. I didn't grow up with handguns. They're not a part of my culture, though I respect that people have them and they respect them and they treat them well and they don't commit as many crimes, and I get that. But it is an emotional issue because for me, I direct several courses. I direct a course that touches every single first-year medical student. We know that in the student population, especially in health science campuses, the prevalence of, it's a high-intensity curriculum, the prevalence of mental disease is high. Stress gets to people. And so what I want to know is I'm trying to maintain as even a compass and as a non-emotional compass about this as possible. On the campuses that you showed us that have concealed carry permissions, are any of them health science campuses? Because I think that there are, as you've indicated, there are very particular things about our campus that make it really difficult to implement this law. Patient care areas, research areas, and from where I stand, anywhere where education is taking place, where I could be potentially exposed to a handgun, it's not something I'm comfortable with. So I just wanted to know, is there experience on health science campuses dealing with medical and other health science students, which are not just the general population of students, they're typically a bit more competitive, there's selectivity, there might be a little bit more, and the data do support that the prevalence of anxiety and stress and burnout disorders within health science professionals and in their students is very high. And so I think as faculty, as staff on the campus, we may be exposed to a slightly different risk category than other campuses. So I don't know if you wanted to comment on health science campus experience.
The ultimate answer about do I know whether there is a distinction within each of these states about how health science campuses have implemented the law versus the so-called academic campuses, no, but I do think the data that I have available is probably contains that level of detail, so I can probably find out the answer and put it on the website as an FAQ response, because clearly all of these campuses have medical schools, so there are policies out there. I just did not dissect it down to that level. I'll make a couple of other comments that are maybe a little bit tangential, but they're points that I wanted to make, and this is as good a time as any. There's no question that I would like for concealed handgun license holders to know, or to understand, that within their rights to carry a handgun is this issue of fear by non-CHL holders, and that demands some respect, if not accommodation. So, Matt, your comments, I think, reflect the views of many people about the fear that they feel. I also wanted to point out, though quite tangentially to your point, is this is a concealed handgun law. Should you see someone with a weapon, including a handgun, meaning it is unconcealed, certainly if you see someone brandishing a firearm, deliberately exposing a handgun, or in any way acting in an erratic way, you should call law enforcement. It is both appropriate that you do so, within the law that you do so, and they are the best equipped and trained to handle those situations. It might be as simple as them going to that person and asking them for their identification, assessing their mental stability, or whatever is appropriate as part of their evaluation that they are trained to conduct. But other than the exception, I suppose, of someone accidentally and briefly exposing a weapon in the course of raising their hand to ask a question, anything that you believe, and that's the term here, you believe is a deliberate display of a firearm or erratic behavior by someone with a weapon requires that you, and good judgment requires that you call law enforcement to report that. They will make the professional judgment as to what the next steps are. You are never in a situation where you have to tell yourself, well, I see he's got a gun and there's nothing I can do about it. There is something you can and should do about it. Okay.
Christine Arcari, Preventive Medicine and Community Health. And one of the things that was early on in your slide was about the unique nature of all the different UT campuses. And I really urge UTMB to put a policy forward that's best for our institution. And maybe that is almost everything, every building is excluded. And let the people up above come back and kick it back, and not to be worried about what we think they're going to say. Because the fact is that we are very different from every other campus. We have the National Laboratory here. We have all our healthcare facilities. And speaking as a graduate program director, my office can very often be a conflict zone, where students or their faculty coming in having disagreements and arguments about the program, about the courses, and also students being in high stress environments. So I really urge UTMB again to put forward what works best for us. And if that means 90% of our buildings should be excluded from this policy, then that's what should be put forward. Thank you.
Hi, Christine Baker, faculty in physical therapy and School of Health Professions. I'm actually going to add a little bit to that. Remember that even though there was discussion that perhaps an exclusion zone could be where there might be grievance hearings or whatever regarding students, but those conversations actually begin in a faculty member's office. If a student comes to me not happy with something that's graded, et cetera, then it can escalate eventually as we go through due process to a grievance. But those conversations start in my office.
Yes.
So just a point to make.
No, I appreciate that, and I meant to acknowledge that in my my visual distinction of the broad spectrum the concept of conflict resolution zones could reasonably include. Yes.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to mention, and perhaps it could be something that can be addressed, because you mentioned that if I am a faculty member and I see someone's concealed handgun, now unconcealed, that I can call law enforcement, and I appreciate their role. However, how long it would take for them to get to my area, would I have the authority to ask that person to leave my teaching environment? And I don't think anyone has an answer right now, but I hope that people will take that into consideration when they're determining the policy, if that's appropriate. Or do I just wait? And it's okay if I have to wait, but that kind of changes the dynamics in my classroom, at least for me.
I think that's actually a very excellent question, because it asks for a distinction between excluding someone because of the presence of a handgun versus excluding someone because of what you interpret as a threatening situation.
Yes, but if it's not concealed, it's not meeting the law, right?
That's correct.
Okay. The other thing I think, and I actually said this when you came to School of Health Professions, I want to say it again. I'm not sure my concern is with the persons that hold a CHL. My concern is that potentially there could be other people on campus that don't hold a CHL that have guns, and I won't know, and no one really except for our police force will know who's supposed to have it and who isn't supposed to have it. That concerns me. As a faculty member, to be honest, I've got 3 kids in college at different campuses in Texas, and it concerns me as a mother as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It points out a very uncomfortable truth, and that is if someone intends to violate the law by bringing a CHL onto campus without a proper license, one wonders if they wouldn't do that today. And that's why I said at the beginning that there are some things this law and our implementation of it can address. There are other things it cannot address, and I will say that the things it cannot address are individuals who statistically represent the greatest danger of violent acts with handguns, people with criminal intent and people with mental illness. If only this law in any way could influence the behavior or actions of those groups, we would all be the better for it. But those are not groups that are likely to be influenced for better or worse by implementation of this law.
Hi. So I'm a graduate student here, and I would like to at least make one comment and one question. The first comment is you have accidental discharge on your slides. I would just like to point out that there is no such thing, with the exception of very rare circumstances, of accidental discharge. They're negligent discharges.
Thank you.
The military has actually gone away from that term as well. So I did grow up with my father as a law enforcement. I joined the military. My brother was in the military. A large number of my family were in the military. So I grew up with guns. So I'm definitely not scared of that environment. Although I will admit that my weapons are at home because I have a 4-year-old daughter, and or actually at my parents' place, and I don't want them around her. But, so I'm kind of curious as to what is the current discussion on the storage of the weapons. If you eliminate 3 buildings on this campus, GNL, Keeler, and the hospital, you've effectively stated no carry policy on this campus, because most of the graduate students are affected by GNL or Keeler, and most of the medical students, or actually the vast majority of medical students, are going to be affected by the no carry in the hospital. So how can we properly store those weapons if we are allowed to bring those on?
Well, there are several parts to that question. Related to storage, the definition of safe storage. The most frequent subject of a definition for safe storage so far has focused on the concept of an actual gun safe, a sturdy, steel, biometrically controlled, lockable box, and not on something more informal such as I will put it in my desk drawer or in my locker or something like that. So the concept of defining a storage process such as a sturdy so-called gun safe. The second is the practical challenges represented by excluding a building. On one hand, that could mean, well, someone can always leave it off campus, at home, secured in their car, even in a parking garage or parking lot here on campus, legal, appropriate, safe storage areas. And thirdly, the issue of should the university take some responsibility for storage options? For example, should we provide safe storage lockers outside of excluded buildings or in some other accessible place so that when someone went from, for example, a non-excluded building to an excluded building, they have a convenient place to secure their weapon? So far, I would say the discussions on the committee are not leaning toward that angle. We are leaving the issue of storage to the individual, both because of the complexity, safety issues, confidentiality issues, security issues of providing storage options ourselves, and the knowledge that there are no other places where handguns are lawfully excluded, which are either required or, as far as I know, have taken on that responsibility, whether that is a court of law, daycare, a racetrack, other places where handguns are legally excluded. The CHL holder is responsible for making a determination about where that handgun is securely stored. So I don't think at this point we are working toward a solution that includes provision of storage. That means the CHL holder will have to make a decision as to where that can be stored. Now, it is possible that a gun safe could be safely stored in a non-excluded building if that's the decision of the committee and determines that it's implementable. For example, a gun safe with the gun secured in a locked office or in some other secured area could plausibly fit the definition of safe storage. And we'd welcome a lot of input about that, because I think storage is one of the challenging issues related to this. CHL holders may present the point of view that you simply raised. I'm not suggesting you are supporting it. Could raise the issue of, if you don't provide me storage on campus, you're telling me I have to leave it in my car or at home. I would be telling you that you're responsible for the storage of your weapon. On the other hand, if the evidence supports the need to provide storage options on campus by the CHL holder, then we could make a decision to allow them to provide the storage, the safe, and for them to have a secure place to store it. That's within the realm of possibility. Please.
Is slightly more restrictive than the way it was presented when you visited our department, or at least where you're leaning towards going. So those questions, those bullet points on the slide where you were sort of unsure about buildings that are connected to each other or multiple stories, when are you going to have some resolution of those, and will we have an opportunity to comment on those questions? Yeah, the interconnected and multi-use buildings, and identifying which buildings, letting people know if
Yes.
they work in a building that's going to be excluded or not.
Absolutely. I think the answer to that is we will be moving to that in the next phase between now and the end of the calendar year, and that those preliminary recommendations before they go to the president will be disseminated to the campus for comment before any sort of final decision is made. Some of them will be easy, some of them will be more difficult. It's not an attractive option to start compartmentalizing a building and saying this room is off limits, or this floor is off limits, or this wing is off limits. It's much easier to define things on a building by building basis. I don't know whether that's possible. And so some segmentation of buildings, I just happen to think Mary Moody is an excellent example of that dilemma. First floor is all classrooms. Second, third, and fourth is virtually all labs.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. Is there a possibility of excluding certain rooms when they're being used for certain functions or certain buildings? I mean, 'cause the Texas State just came out with their proposal, and it was a little confusing to me when they were talking about when the regents are meeting, that building would be...
The concept of time-based exclusion.
I'm a sociologist, what can I say?
Yes, of course you are.
Time and space continuum.
No, let me tell you why that's, if this makes you feel any better, Dr. Rudkin, let me tell you why that is not a crazy thought.
Today, I'm not crazy.
It has not come up in terms of those examples, but there is a law that excludes handguns in facilities where school-based, in this case talking about, for example, elementary or high school groups, school groups conducting an educational activity on the campus. We're still trying to get a clear interpretation about, for example, when students from an elementary or high school come to visit UTMB's campus as a camp, a workshop, some organized official activity, even a tour, do we need to make sure that they are limited to exclusion zones? So the idea of an area being off limits only at certain times is rational, but highly complex in terms of how we would actually implement it. So that is being discussed.
Dwight Wolf, I'm in the Department of Psychiatry. Dr. Ainsworth, thanks to you and the committee for thoughtfully going through these very complex issues. I appreciate that you're looking at the issue around conflict resolution situations, and as you know, we're both on the Academic Review Committee, and sometimes those are very sensitive and very emotional issues that are discussed, so I would appreciate the committee continuing to think about specific scenarios in which we're dealing with potentially volatile and emotional discussions with students who are under significant stress. Also, if I understood correctly, the clinics and the hospitals are likely to be excluded, and I would hope that that's the case. As you know, I'm a psychiatrist, but my patients are everyone else's patients. 40% of primary care visits, as you know, have a psychiatric component. So I really appreciate hearing that the clinics and hospitals are likely to be excluded.
Thank you. I suppose I should mention one other piece of information that I think falls just a bit short of a statistic, but is the best information available to us related to the experience on these campuses in other states. None of the campuses in any of the states represented here have reported a rise in violent crime with handguns or an increased incidence of violations by CHL holders since their concealed carry laws were in effect. We've been able to identify 3 examples of accidental or perhaps now negligent discharges that are related to safe handling practices. One is someone taking their handgun out of a holster to show someone. The other 2 represent a handgun being carried in a pocket, unholstered, and the person accidentally, the 2 persons accidentally shooting themselves in the foot. And so clearly, it's why I have tried to put a lot of emphasis on the education, the safe handling concepts, the closely controlled concept of not letting your weapon be separated from you. It's one thing to say a CHL should be in a holster and attached to your body. You can't walk away from your body. But if your CHL is in your backpack, which common interpretation of the law considers that legal, or your purse or your briefcase, it is possible to walk away from that item and therefore walk away from your weapon. And that represents a lot of concern that education needs to be a big part of this. Safe handling and all is something we can clearly put some credence in as impacting the local environment. There are many things we can't control, but we think the education along those lines we can influence. I believe we've reached the appointed hour. Dr. Callender, are there any closing comments that you'd like to make? All right. Thanks to all of you, both here locally and remotely, for joining us, and please take advantage of the Campus Carry website, utmb.edu/campus-carry, for any additional comments or suggestions. Thank you.
UTMB Health, working together to work wonders.